this training, we're going to talk about the new Oregon Realtors form, Form 1.1a. It is a seller's sale agreement. It is the seller making an offer rather than the buyer making an offer. Now, to understand what this form does, we need to cover the basics of contracting. So a contract at its core is an agreement between two or more parties competent for that purpose upon a sufficient consideration to do or not do a particular thing which lawfully may be done or omitted. That's from a case from 1919 called Finati versus Beale. In other words, it basically just says if you're going to create a contract, you need to have two people who agree to do something, and both of them need to get something out of that deal. That makes a contract. And it's not a lot at its baseline. That means that a lot of things can be a contract, but just be aware, to have a valid contract under law, the core of it is you just have to have two people that agree with each other to do something, and both of them need to get something out of that agreement. The offer is a promise, which is more than a general expression of willingness, that creates a legal relationship to carry out a definite obligation. It is someone who is saying more than just a broad statement of intent. They are saying, I very specifically intend to do one thing if we can reach mutual agreement. Nothing at law requires that an offer be given only by the purchaser. The buyer doesn't have to be the only one that makes an offer. This is the case, for example, with counteroffers. When a seller counteroffers a buyer's offer, the seller is making an offer to the buyer. And so you never at any point have to have the offer specifically come from a buyer. The offeror of an offer is merely the party that wishes to present the terms of an offer. Now, there are some special considerations to be had if you're the one that is actually serving the ball. If you're the first one to send an offer in, that does change the negotiation, but it's not something where the law says the only person who can make an offer to purchase real estate has to be the purchaser of said real estate. And so a seller can make an offer. They have that right. The seller has the ability to make an offer to the buyer and to be the offeror of that offer. And what that means is that the buyer will have the power to accept the seller's offer or to reject the seller's offer or to counter the seller's offer. Now, when the seller makes the offer in the first situation, there are some things that the seller loses. For example, the seller is not able to benefit from multiple offer scenarios. You cannot send a seller offer to a dozen different buyers and have all of them accept at the same time or try and bounce their purchase prices higher because you have potential ability to accept any of those. When a seller makes the offer, the buyer has the ability to say, I accept your offer, and to lock down that property under contract. And so if a seller is making an offer, the first buyer to accept that offer then becomes the possessor of that offer. They have the equitable right to purchase that property, and you should never have multiple buyers who are all locked down to purchase the same property at once. You can add language to contracts technically that allows for some sort of a continual acceptance that occurs after mutual acceptance in the first situation, but that is not what the form we're going to look at does. Instead, this form is just a seller offer to a buyer, and if you have a buyer accept the offer, the parties are under contract. Now, there are some situations where a seller would wish to present an offer. For example, if the buyer is unrepresented and is asking for the broker to scribe the offer. A buyer who is unrepresented having a broker scribe for them creates a very thorny position in agency law because that seller agent is going to theoretically be performing services for that buyer. And the services they're performing are theoretically ongoing, and there are a burl of complications at agency law that action presents. Rather than forcing the seller agent into this very complicated legal scenario that they probably are in the wrong on several various ways that they could do this, we can instead have the seller simply make the offer. Buyer, what are the terms you want to see? I'll consider it. I'll make an offer. And if the buyer presents certain terms, they say like, well, I want to buy the house for $500,000. The seller can modify as they choose when they make their offer. The seller is the one that has the right to make this offer to the buyer, and they can set the terms at whatever they'd like. It is a way, though, for an unrepresented buyer to receive an offer on pre-printed language, on pre-printed forms, not a napkin offer that doesn't involve the seller's agent scribing for the opposite party in a negotiation. Similarly, if the buyer is interested in purchasing, but they're really uncertain what they want to offer, they don't know what the market will abide, they don't know what the seller wants to offer, they don't know any of the terms that they would want to put in the contract, and this buyer is simply paralyzed by indecision, a seller sending an offer could push that buyer off the fence. It could say, hey buyer, I know you're wondering what I'm willing to accept on this transaction. I am going to give you an offer that tells you exactly what I would like to see. And if that's within the range of your acceptable terms, then great, we're under contract. You can say yes. But it allows the buyer to not have to be the one that essentially asks the other party out to dance. Instead, the seller can be the one making the difficult first step of presenting terms. The third situation that would potentially be a reason why the seller might want to offer is the seller may just have set terms that they don't even want to harbor any sort of discussion or different points. The seller may have a minimum price or a maximum price, or they might have a minimum set of terms. You have to waive the inspection. And if they present the offer to the buyer with those terms baked into it, they're anchoring the deal. Hey, buyer, here's my offer to you. It requires that you waive your inspection. You can counteroffer and write whatever terms you want in it. But keep in mind, I asked you to waive the inspection on the first round. It's something that I find valuable to me that you would not do the inspection. So if you present a counteroffer and you deviate from those terms that I've given you, maybe your offer looks way worse to me and I might reject it. So you can anchor the terms if you are the seller presenting the offer in the first place. Those are just 3 situations, possible reasons for why a seller may wish to be the one presenting an offer. Others exist. Now, the form itself is actually very straightforward. It is literally the exact same as the residential sale agreement with a couple minor variations. It has the opening section is changed where it would normally say this is how a buyer makes an offer to purchase the property from a seller. Instead, it says the buyer and the seller enter into this agreement. This is a binding contract. There are some things in here that the buyer is going to want to talk to other parties about. Some language is just merely shifted a little bit. For example, where it says the seller offers to sell the property to buyer. Previously, the language in the regular residential sales agreement says the buyer offers to purchase the property. And so minor shifts of language, they don't change the term. That section 4A just talks about the purchase price, but instead it changes the nomenclature so that you know this is a seller offer rather than a buyer offer. Similarly, in the signature section of the contract, it says this is the seller's offer. By signing here, I'm making an offer to you. Previously, in the regular one, that would say, this is a buyer's offer to you, seller. You have the ability to accept or reject. Just changes in the language, minor shifts for the clarity of understanding who is making this offer. The one significant modification from the normal sales agreement is found in what was previously the due diligence contingency. In this Form 1.1a, it is not a due diligence contingency. Instead, it is discretionary contingencies. It has the whole regular due diligence contingency. The buyer still gets the right to inspect. They can look at the property. They can do their various inspections as they need. But in addition to the buyer's due diligence contingency, there is a seller's discretionary contingency, what you see on lines 130 through 133. Unless waived in writing by the seller, within 2 business days after mutual acceptance, the seller can disapprove of the buyer or their financing and terminate the transaction by giving a notice of termination. At that point, we send the earnest money back to the buyer. Essentially, it lets the seller have a 2-day period to reject or change their mind about the contract if they disapprove of the buyer's financing, or the buyer, if the seller makes the offer and then the buyer says something to the effect of like, oh, that's great. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make this happen, but I'll get a loan. I just have to contact my lender in the first place. If the seller goes, I was hoping you already had a loan in place, I don't agree with that at all, the seller could theoretically back out using this discretionary contingency. And so where we previously there was a due diligence contingency and that alone was the buyer's specialized contingency, this Form 1.1a also creates a seller discretionary contingency that exists for 2 days after the contract is mutually accepted. And that is the one major change between the 2 forms, other than just nomenclature that says this is a seller offer rather than a buyer offer. Other than that, all the terms are the same otherwise. You would still have the same ability to set a closing date, the same ability to modify your contingency timelines for how long the buyer has to get financing, the number of days for title review. All of those things will otherwise be the same as a regular residential purchase and sale agreement from the buyer side. It just changes who is making the offer. If you have any questions, please contact Oregon Realtors. Forms@OregonRealtors.org is the place where you can send comments or thoughts about any of the forms we have in the library.